Good, thank you. Right, Mr. Dowden?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Bennett.
Mr. Dowden, I'm going to ask you now about your communications with the control room on the night of the fire. Can I first ask you to look at policy 790 in the policy bundle at tab 5? That's policy 790, fire survival guidance calls, to which the relativity reference is LFB, and then there are 4 zeros, 1257, we've got it there. And that's reviewed as at current as at April 2014. Can I ask you please to look internally at paragraph 9 of that policy? Doesn't have an internal page number, I'm afraid, but it's paragraph 9. So it should actually be the relativity reference internal pagination page 9 as well. No. Go back.
Page 5, perhaps?
I'm grateful mine isn't paginated. Page 5, Mr. Trial Director. Thank you very much. There's the heading 9, communication with control. And just look at that together with me, if you would. 9.1. It is vital that control is kept informed of the actions being taken to resolve each FSG call. The fact that control is aware of the actions being carried out on the incident ground will greatly enhance the advice given to FSG callers. Was that a policy or principle which you were aware of on the night of the fire?
Yes.
And looking at 9.2, informative messages, it says informative messages from the incident ground should also contain an update on progress relating to those specific FSG calls by both the flat and house number, flat or house number, to avoid confusion. Were you aware of that policy or principle on the night of the fire?
Yes.
And then 9.3, the outcome of every FSG call must be communicated to control. And again, were you aware of that policy or principle on the night of the fire?
That's correct.
Now, we only, I think, have 2 records in the short incident log of informative messages, which were persons reported. What would that expression communicate to control about the detail which the policy requires should be contained in messages to the control room from the incident ground?
At the point from when I sent persons reported from the incident ground, I was unaware that there was FSG calls in progress at that time, if there was at all FSG in progress.
And what would the expression persons reported tell control room operators about whether the advice that they would be giving to anybody who did call, who found themselves trapped in a flat, should remain, or could safely remain, to stay put?
Could you repeat that question for me, please?
Yes. What would the expression persons reported tell you, or tell the control room operators, about whether stay put advice being given to callers by the control room would remain safe?
It wouldn't really provide the control operator with any information. It's more assessment from the incident commander, who was myself at the time, that I believed that there were people within that block who were involved in a fire.
Did you talk to any control room operators at any point while you were incident commander, about the conditions in the building?
No.
Did you, for example, did you tell them that you had now started to see people coming out of the building suffering the effects of smoke and spluttering, coughing, and with sooty faces? Did you tell the control room that?
No, the only way that would generally be facilitated from the fire ground is within a further informative message. The only informative message I sent and had was my first informative message just after we made pumps 6. Because of the workload on the fire ground at that time, the way I was consumed, everything that was going on around me, I had, again, that tells a story of how unique this incident is and how unprecedented it was. I didn't have time as the officer in charge to even try and get some message to control because I was so consumed in everything that was going on in the incident ground at that time.
Did you think that it was important for control room to know that you had now, by 1:30, seen occupants of the building emerging with sooty faces and having suffered the effects of smoke?
That's correct, and that's why at that point in my assessment was that I sent the person's reported message to control for my assessment that I believe that people are now involved in this fire.
But a person's reported message, what would that tell the control room about the conditions you were seeing on the ground at that moment?
Nothing about the conditions, no.
And what about residents and what they were suffering in terms of smoke inhalation and sooty faces? What would it tell them about that?
Nothing. Again, the only way we could clarify that to control was to send a further informative message after the person's reported message had gone. But again, the way that this fire was developing, the way it was unfolding in front of me as the incident commander, the way it was just consuming our resources in terms of both personnel and fire appliances on the incident ground, that was very, very difficult to get that message away. It's difficult because obviously I myself or a person has to go to the fire appliance to send that message. That can't be done remotely from the fire appliance.
If you wanted to send a very urgent message to the control room, was there no way you could do it from your handheld radio?
No, I cannot.
So is the only message system between the incident ground, was on the night of the fire, the only method of communication between the incident ground and the control room from the incident command pump or the command unit later and the control room?
There's probably a point to clarify here. For station-based personnel, for officers based at a station level, we have access to the main scheme radio only via the pumping appliances in the front of the pump, as we have previously described over the course of this inquiry. And all firefighters and officers up to the rank of Watch Manager B will have their own personal issue firebrand radio. Senior officers from the rank of station manager and above will have, again, their own personal issue firebrand radio, but they also have their own personal issue main scheme radio, which is portable and it's kept on their persons.
Did you think of going, when you saw the residents or occupants of the building emerging with sooty faces and coughing and spluttering, did you think to go quickly to the radio, the main scheme radio in the ICP and radio a detailed message about what you had seen to the control room?
No, from my decision and my thought process at the time was I was the incident commander. I need to be available in the incident ground, keep my situational awareness up, make sure I'm visible on the fire ground so that any oncoming appliances, further resources or officers, I'm easily identifiable to those, or any other responsible people who have further information. And if I did that by going to a fire appliance, that would take me away from that role.
When you saw people emerging with sooty faces and spluttering and coughing, did you think that was information that it was important for the control room operators to know about?
I'm going to be honest, I don't have that entered my thought process at that time.
Was there a reason why you didn't ask one of your crew to go to the incident command pump and send a message to the control room saying lots of people coming out suffering the effects of smoke, even if that's simple?
Again, I can only comment on my actions that night, the decisions I made, and that's something that wasn't taken.
You mentioned loud hailers earlier on today as a means of communicating with residents. Do you remember a firefighter with a loud hailer at some point in the night when you were still incident commander, telling people to get out if they could? Do you remember that?
I don't have a memory or recollection of that, no.
Let me see if I can just jog your memory a little bit. The ORR, the Operational Response Report, puts that event at 0146 and attributes it to firefighter Murray, who I think is off Hammersmith G361. Does that help your recollection?
No, it doesn't.
I don't remember firefighter Murray going around with a loud hailer.
Again, I can only corroborate my account of events, and I don't have a recollection of that happening on the fireground.
Can I move then to the topic of fire survival guidance calls and communications? If you go back to where we were in policy 790, that's policy bundle tab 5, FSG calls. Can I please ask you to look at paragraph 1.1, which is should be on internal page 2. Right, no, I don't think that's what we're after. I'm after something called introduction. That's not it. I'm looking at tab 5 of the policies bundle. I'm sorry, Mr. Dowden, this is
That's fine.
communications difficulty here. If you go to page 2 of that document, please, Mr. Fire Director. Right, thank you very much. You can see introduction 1.1. The purpose of this policy is to explain what a fire survival guidance call is and to describe how critical information should be exchanged between brigade control and the incident ground. It provides guidance on how this information is to be recorded for use by incident commanders. Were you, on the night of the fire, were you aware of this policy and what it was supposed to do?
Yes, I was.
And if you look at paragraph 5.1, which starts at the bottom of the same page, information transfer to the incident, there's an awful lot of guidance that we can see between 5.1 and 5.13. Take a moment or two just to familiarise yourself with it, if you wouldn't mind. I'm not going to read it out aloud to you, but because there's an awful lot of information there. But my question is, were you familiar with this, the details of this policy? As I say, take a moment, take as long as you like.
Mr. Millett, there's a lot in this. There's a whole page or so of quite detailed text. I'm wondering whether it's reasonable to ask the witness whether he was aware of it. I mean, were you aware in general terms of the fire survival guidance system?
Yes, I was.
There may be particular parts of it that you need to ask him about, I don't know.
So can I ask you to look at paragraph 5.5 specifically? Which tells you what control will attempt to do, which is to gather all the information on the control information form and to relay this information to the incident as and when it becomes available. And the control information form is Appendix 2, which you'll find towards the back of the policy. Perhaps you should have a look at that. That's on internal page 8. Are you familiar with that control information form?
Yes.
Yes. And that's a form that would be, just help me with this, because it's a mystery at the moment, slightly to me. Would that form be filled in the control room or on the fireground or both?
No, that's so from those bullet points you just saw previous slide, control operator will ask those sort of trigger questions. That form you see in front of you there, control information form, is carried on all frontline pumping appliances in a triplicate message format. Mm-hmm. So the information by those bullet points you saw earlier will correspond to the information that will be relayed on that form by either appliances in attendance at the incident. If the incident is of a dynamic nature, then the control should pass that information to oncoming appliances, and that should be made as soon available to the incident commander when those oncoming appliances arrive.
Right. And if you look at paragraph 5.9, I think this makes the point you were making. It says all FSG calls. Sorry, Mr. Trial Director, could you go back to 5.9? That's it, and just highlight that for us, please. Thank you. All FSG call information must be passed to the IC, who will decide what action should be taken. The expectation is that ICs will treat FSG calls as a priority and consider deploying and increasing resources accordingly. On the night of the fire, were you aware that this was a policy requirement of you?
Yes.
And just before we move on, in terms of prioritisation, could you look at paragraph 4.2 on the page before, under the section prioritising calls? And if it could just be enlarged, please. It says, the IC, based on their situational awareness and the information provided by control, will decide how to prioritise FSG calls and the actions to be taken on the incident ground. IC should direct resources to those callers at greatest risk, high priority if practicable. Other callers not seen as greatest risk, medium priority, should be allocated resources when available. Now again, were you aware of that principle and policy requirement on the night of the fire?
Yeah. Yes, I was.
Yeah. Now, just in the light of the background of those policy requirements and your awareness of them, according to our records, Brigade Control by 1:36 had received 13 FSG calls. The earliest one had come at 01:24 or so from flat 195 on floor 22. Were you aware of, first of all, an FSG call coming in before 1:30, let's say, from flat 195 on floor 22?
No, I wasn't.
Were you aware by 1:36 that Brigade Control had received 13 FSG calls?
No, I wasn't.
It seems from the ORR as a record that G271 wasn't responding to priority messages, which then had to be intercepted by Acton's pump ladder G261. That's on the ORR. I can show it to you if you want to, but take it from me, that's what it says. Did you know that G271 wasn't responding to priority messages from control?
Don't recollect that. We weren't responding to the FSG calls in progress at that time. And as I said, alluded to previously in my statement, that at a dynamic stage of the incident, that can happen. People can get consumed very, very, very quickly on the fire ground. And in the case of Grenfell Tower, this is something that none of us had ever seen before. Unprecedented scale, as I keep referring to. So there is that default that, okay, if the resources on the ground are stretched and we are consumed, then that will be passed to the oncoming appliances. But I wasn't aware as the incident commander at that time, no.
Okay. So, to take that time, 1:36 or so, Mr. Dowden, can you tell me what you knew, if anything, about the about what fire survival guidance calls were coming in and being responded to?
The first knowledge I had of the fire survival guidance call, which we have spoken about and I referred to in my statement, was when I was the team leader of Command Unit 8 presented himself to me. And as soon as I was aware of that, I took immediate action.
That was, I think, when you went to the bridgehead, was it?
No, that was when the Command Unit team leader of Command Unit 8 was in attendance, and the decision was then, the most senior officer on the fire ground at the time was Brett Loft, Station Manager Brett Loft. He was aware of his responsibility to take over. Having known now he had FSG in attendance, my priorities were to save life. I wanted a strict control measure in terms of that, and the decision between myself and Station Manager Loft was to process, manage our resources through the Command Unit team leader and manage the fire survival guidance call. And that's the first time I knew on that fire ground that I had fire survival guidance in progress.
Yes, I understand. I'm going to ask you about the handover with Firefighter Loft in just a moment. Just one more question on this specific point. Up to the point at which you spoke to Firefighter Loft, who I think is a station manager.
Station Manager Loft, that's correct.
He's more senior to you. Before that point, you could see what was happening with the building, and you could see what you could see. Were you surprised that you had received no information from control about fire survival guidance calls in progress?
I can't say that I had that emotion or that thought at that time. That night, particularly when I was in its command, I had a lot of emotions running through my body and thoughts and everything else, but not one of surprise at that particular point that sticks out, no.
Now, Mr. Dowden, I'm going to ask you about a handful, just a few, of some specific instances. Okay, just so you're ready for what I'm going to do next. And the first question, or set of questions, and there aren't many questions I've got for you on this, is about a young girl called Jessica. And just a few questions about her.
Just
No, right, we won't go there.
Do you need a bit of time?
Please.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
we're right.
Fair enough.
5 minutes going to be enough? No, 10. 25 to 3, please. Off you go. Now, Mr. Dowden, before we carry on, I'm going to ask Mr. Millett to give you an overview of what he wants to cover in the questions that he's still got to ask you. I think that might help you to see where we're going.
Thank you.
All right?
Yes. Mr. Dowden, first of all, I'm not going to keep you any more than about half an hour, or till the next break. So sorry. Mr. Dowden, first of all, I'm not going to keep you for more than another half an hour or so. So it's not long to go. The other thing is that I should tell you what I'm going to cover so that you're comfortable with what's coming up in terms of topics. It's the arrival of Station Manager Loft, the handover of Incident Command, and then a few questions about your activities inside the building, and then at the bridgehead, and then one or two very short questions about PPV fans and about loss of water pressure. Are you okay with those topics?
Yep, that's fine.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, so you did mention earlier in your evidence the arrival of Mr. Loft, Station Manager Loft. Now we have it in our short incident log that he arrived at 1:32 or so. So around about the time that you made pumps 2025. Now, is it right that normally, as a station manager, he would take over incident command from you?
That's correct, yes.
And at that point, the makeup of the status, I think, in fact, exactly, was a 20 pump fire, but it became 25 very soon after that. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Did you, at that point, when Station Manager Loft arrived, did you see another station manager at the scene?
Not that I can recall, no.
So he was the first one you saw?
He was the first senior officer I saw in attendance, yes.
And did he come up to you, or did you have to go and look for him?
From my recollection, he presented himself to me because I had the instant commander tabard on.
And did he say to you, I am taking over, in a clear way, or what did he say?
No.
What did you discuss with him?
I think from my recollection, I can refer back to my statement that Station Manager Bretloff was aware of his responsibility to take over, but at that time, as we previously discussed, that was the first time that I received on the fire ground that we were receiving multiple FSG calls. Rather than delay time in terms of doing a full handover to Station Manager Loft, in terms of where we were to at this point, resources and anything else, on the incident ground, the decision was taken that the most productive and use of Station Manager Loft would for him to be take ownership and facilitate the fire survival guidance calls, and with the team command unit team leader as well.
In your statement, if you can go to it, so we've got it exactly, page 9 of 16, just below, or just about halfway down, page 9, you say, ordinarily the first SM on scene should take over as incident commander, but I decided the best thing he could do was to deal with the fire survival guidance calls that were coming in. So, was the decision that you... Sorry, let me ask it this way. Did that mean that he wouldn't become incident commander, but you would stay in post as incident commander?
That's correct. If it would be impossible of an incident of that scale to remain incident commander and then also manage the fire survival guidance calls that were coming in.
So was the decision that you should remain incident commander your own decision?
I would say that's unfair on Station Manager Bretloff. I would say it was a joint decision.
A joint decision, okay. And was there not another station manager in attendance who could have handled the fire survival guidance calls coming in?
Not that I was aware.
Okay. So at the point at which you had this discussion with him about him taking over fire survival guidance calls, what did you know about the fire survival guidance calls coming in?
I had no indication of the sort of exact details of the number of FSG calls. It just knew that it was from my memory, the information we received, we had multiple FSG calls being received.
Right. Do you remember whether it was the station manager Loft who mentioned fire survival guidance calls to you, and then you had a discussion about it, or whether you mentioned fire survival guidance calls to him? How did it start?
From my understanding, it was from myself, because I received that information from the command unit leader, command unit team leader, beg your pardon. The
command unit team leader, who was that?
I don't know his name, but I believe the first command unit in attendance was CU8, and it would have been a team leader from that command unit.
Right. Thank you for that. And I'm just going to explore that a little bit more. CU8, which I think was Fulham.
That's correct, yes.
From memory. Where was it parked? Do you remember, in relation to the tower?
I don't know.
And did you go to CU8, or did the team leader from CU8 come to see you?
The team leader came to find me on the Instagram. The only time that I ever went to a command unit was when I was eventually taken off the fire ground at approximately 08:30 hours on the 14th of June.
Yeah. And as a result of your discussion, as I think you say, with Station Manager Loft, it was decided between you that he would take over the handling of fire survival guidance calls. What would you do?
I would resume the role of incident commander.
And do what?
Again, to have the specific detail of that conversation, that would be difficult to recollect. It was just, I was resuming in command of that incident.
When you had your discussion with Station Manager Loft, did you discuss the number of calls that had been received by that point?
Not that I can recall, no.
Did you discuss any system of prioritisation of calls with Station Manager Loft in your conversation with him?
No, the gist of the conversation that I had with Station Manager Brett Loft was in terms of, so he would take ownership and facilitate the management of the fire survival guidance calls, change to a different radio frequency, channel 3, because obviously channel 1 was becoming quite congested with radio traffic. So that radio channel 3 would be designated just to manage the fire survival guidance calls, and that would be fed up into the bridgehead.
Was it a long conversation with Station Manager Loft?
I don't remember it being a long conversation, no.
Do you remember anything about the arrival of Andy Walton on the scene?
I do remember Andy Walton arriving on the scene, yes.
Can I ask you to look at your contemporaneous notes, which should be in tab 1B of the witness bundle? And I want to look at your main notes, page 5, which is the number 5 in the ring at the top, right-hand corner. And you say halfway down, Station Manager Loft reported to me. Can you see that? Can you see that
Yes.
clearly, Mr. Dowden? Right. Station Manager Loft reported to me along with Station Manager Andy Walton. I handed over to them that I currently have no reports of people trapped. But on the 11th and 16th floors, 2 residents were unable to leave due to illness and mobility issues. We've covered that. And then lower down, you say, the decision was made that SM Loft would take ownership of the FSG calls. And then you say, and SM Walton, Station Manager Walton, would now take over as Incident Commander. And it's that takeover as Incident Commander I want to ask you about, based on your note. And from your recollection, do you think that Andy Walton took over at the same time as your discussion about fire survival guidance calls with Brett Loft?
I think there is, in my main statement I provided to the MPS, I think there was a delay. Those contemporaneous notes were started to be made, I think, it's either the morning or that night of June the 14th when we drew back in on duty. As you can imagine, the ordeal that we had been through, I was trying to best remember in terms of what I thought happened at that incident, my perception of what happened. Again, with further reflection, I had more time to digest, process events of that night. From what I remember, Station Manager Andy Walton attended after the moment that I had the conversation with Station Manager Brett Loft.
Yeah, and do you remember roughly how long afterwards?
It's difficult to put a time scale on it. I wouldn't be able to put a definitive time on that. No.
Let me see if I can help a little bit. If you've got the documents bundle and turn in it to tab 7, this is an early LFB log document provided to the inquiry. It's LFB 703. And on page 2 of that document, Mr. Dowden, if you look at the sentence in red that says 050 Est, H41S, Station Manager SM Walton is now Incident Commander, that's an estimated time of 1:50. Does that help with your recollection of when Andy Walton took over?
That fits in with a time scale, because from my understanding I was in Instant Commander for roughly about an hour on that night, yes.
Yeah. Okay. And during the period between Brett Loft taking over fire survival guidance at around 1:30, let's be rough for the moment about that, and the following 20 minutes or so when Andy Walton took over as Incident Commander, do you remember having any further discussions with Brett Loft about fire survival guidance calls?
Not that I can recall, no.
Okay. Now, can I just ask you about GMs, group managers? Were you aware that Group Manager Welch had arrived at the incident ground at 01:57 or so?
Not on the night of the incident, no.
Not until after the incident?
That's correct. Post-incident I did, but...
So who was the first group manager that you encountered on the night? Do you remember?
I think the first group manager I encountered was Group Manager Richard Welch, but that was when I was relieved of command and I went up into the bridgehead, and at some point I did meet Group Manager Richard Welch when he came into the bridgehead and took over control of the bridgehead. Right.
Okay. So the next question is, do you remember having a clear handover of incident command to Andy Walton?
I don't. I remember having a conversation or a handover to Station Manager Andy Walton. I couldn't give you a clear and discrete handover, but I can give you a understanding of what that content should be as per the decision-making model.
Okay, but I think my question is a simple one. Do you remember handing him the white tabard and white helmet?
I wouldn't have handed the helmet over because we both have white helmets, so it's not that. It's just the case of you hand over the tabard.
No, sure.
And I believe I did hand over the Instant Commander tabard to Andy Walton. Yes.
Okay. And what did he do with it? Did he continue to wear it, or did he give it to somebody else?
From my recollection, and again in referral to my statement, I did a handover to Station Manager Anthony Wharton, I couldn't give you a timescale, but in a quite close proximity to the handover between me and Station Manager Andy Walton, another senior officer presenting himself on the fire ground, who I now know as Deputy Assistant Commissioner Andy O'Loughlin.
If you could look at your statement, again please, Mr Dowden, at page 9, towards the bottom of the page, we see here what you say about that handover. And you say, 6 lines up from the bottom of the page, the next senior officer in attendance was Andy Walton. See that? Just up from the bottom of the page. And I was handing over to him when DAC Andy O'Loughlin arrived, almost at the same time. I briefed them, but I can't remember exactly what I said on the night. And I handed the incident commander tabard to SM Walton, who gave it to DAC O'Loughlin, and he became the incident commander. Just looking at that, it looks as if you handed over to Station Manager Walton, who immediately handed over incident command to DAC O'Loughlin. Is that how it happened?
That's my version of that recollection. It was a very short amount of time from the period that Station Manager Andy Walton resumed the role of incident commander to then Deputy Assistant Commissioner Andy O'Loughlin resuming the role of incident commander.
Right. Were you present when Station Manager Walton gave the incident commander tabard to DAC O'Loughlin?
I wouldn't 100% be able to say I recall the actual tabard being given to Andy O'Loughlin, but I do remember all 3 of us being outside at one point together, yes. Okay.
Well, let's stick with Andy Walton as the first person who got the white tabard then. When he took over, was any operational strategy discussed between you two?
So from my recollection of what happened, I detailed, it's going to be difficult. I think I obviously handed over to him about the FSG calls, the actions I'd taken to manage that, the size of the incident in terms of resourcing, 25 pumps. Again, I can't be confident or 100% accurate on this, but I believe also I informed him in terms of the command structure I put in place in terms of the staging area and also the resources at Bridgehead.
Did you discuss compartmentation?
I can't recall if we did, no.
Did you discuss the fire and smoke conditions of the building internally?
That's something I can't recall.
Do you know from your own recollection whether Station Manager Loft had himself discussed fire survival guidance calls with Andy Walton?
Not that I was aware.
Now, both Andy Walton and DAC O'Loughlin say in their statements, and again, we'll obviously have to explore this with them, but that they say that they understood from you that only the cladding on the outside was burning and falling off, and that the fire was only on the exterior. Is that something you told them? That's their recollection. Is that your recollection?
I cannot confirm if that was a conversation. You know, that was obvious from that time in that incident that there was obviously an external fire on that building because of the way it had developed so quickly. But I cannot confirm if that's something I actually handed over to them.
At the point at which you handed over incident command, was there any discussion about stay put advice at all?
Not that I can recall.
At the same point, when you handed over incident command, was there any discussion about, or communication with the control room about the extent of the failure of compartmentation or the smoke and fire spread within the building? Was there a discussion about that?
I can't recall, no.
Was there a discussion that you had at the point of handover about whether it was possible to deploy large numbers of firefighters into the stairs?
Again, it's difficult to confirm, but trying to put some perspective on it. I've just been in charge of this incident for an hour. I've seen something that I don't think most or any junior officer probably in the UK fire service has ever been involved with. And to try and pinpoint and recollect every single bit of information that was handed over there, and that point is very, very difficult.
At the point that you were relieved, Mr. Dowden, did you have any thoughts about whether it was appropriate that you should have been left as incident commander until the moment you were relieved?
I had no thoughts on that. My thoughts at that moment in time was doing the best I could as a firefighter to do the job that I've been employed to do on that night.
Thank you. I've got just a few questions about what happened next to him going to the bridgehead. You say in your statement that after you handed over, you went to the bridgehead. That's right, isn't it?
That's correct.
And you say that at that point, this is in your witness statement, I don't need to take you to, but just help me with it. You discovered that there were 170 fire survival guidance calls to deal with. That's what you say in your statement.
That's from what I was understanding. Not on that night. That's something that I later learnt post-incident.
Oh, I see.
I wasn't aware at that point when I went to the bridgehead we had 170. That was something I was, through obviously discussions and meetings, that's something I was aware. I believe that's the number we had, yes.
So when you got to the bridgehead, do you remember how long after being relieved of incident command you arrived?
I remember I was in the lobby, ground floor lobby area for a bit, went to the lift area, to the stair. It was only minutes.
And who was in charge at the bridgehead at that point when you arrived? Do you remember?
From my understanding, I believe at that point there was Watch Manager Brian O'Keefe and Watch Manager Louisa De Silva from Golf 34 Chelsea.
And what did you find at the bridgehead when you arrived there?
It was a very, very busy environment. There was a number of BA wearers from what I remember. From my recollection, I've never seen two of my firefighters, firefighter Alex Decent-Auburn and firefighter Justin O'Byrne, who, from my memory, were working on two entry control boards at that point. It's difficult to really pinpoint other specifics, but those are the pieces that I sort of stick out in my memory.
Mr. Dowden, would you just give me 1 second?
Yes.
Mr. Dowden, I've got no more questions for you. I just want to thank you, both personally and on behalf of the inquiry, for your courage in standing there for 3 days and answering my questions. Your evidence has been enormously helpful to our work, and I think we as a team salute you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I'd like to echo what Mr. Millett has said. I'm really grateful to you for coming to give your evidence, and you've given it, in my view, with courage and candour, and without shying away from the difficult questions, of which I'm afraid there have been many. And in doing all that, I think you set a really good example to those who may be asked to come and give evidence later on. So thank you very much indeed. And as Mr. Millett said, I think you should know that your evidence is really very valuable to us, and we're all very grateful to you. So thank you very much. I'm sorry it's been such a difficult time.
That's okay.
Would you like to leave us now?
Cheers.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to ask you to rise for 5 minutes. There is some further evidence of Mr. Dowden's that I'd like to have read aloud into the record.
Yes.
I'm not going to risk my voice any further, so I'm going to ask Mr. Kinnear to do that.
Well, would this be a good time to have a short break?
Yes, it would.
It's not going to take very long to read Mr. Dowden's remaining evidence, is it?
It depends on Mr. Kinnear.
Well, yes, of course. But I think we can still allow ourselves the luxury of a 10-minute break,
Yes, we can.
can't we?
Yes,
we'll say 3 on that clock. Thank you. Mr. Millett, before you continue, there's a matter I just need to mention. I understand that there may be a certain amount of concern and misunderstanding about the remarks which I addressed to Mr. Dowden at the end of his evidence. I have to say I'm surprised and disappointed that that should be so. My remarks were entirely born out of courtesy for the witness and a degree of compassion for someone who clearly found giving evidence over 3 days a difficult matter, and sometimes, as we all saw, more than he could really cope with. I would hope that it went without saying that my remarks do not in any sense prejudice my view of the issues. There's a long way to go in this inquiry, and my conclusion in due course will be based entirely on the whole of the evidence and the submissions that have been made to me at that stage. And I hope that if I extend similar courtesy and understanding to other witnesses, wherever they may come from, that those who hear them will understand why they're made and that they have no bearing on my ultimate view of the issues. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Can I, before I hand over to Mr. Kinnear to read into the record the rest of Mr. Dowden's evidence, can I just mention one procedural matter, really, which is that I was hoping to take a short break or take advantage of the break to see whether there were any final follow-up questions that court participants might want me to ask Mr. Dowden. Unfortunately, because of the way in which the evidence ended today and Mr. Dowden's circumstances, I thought it best to call a halt and not carry on with that. And I hope people will understand that that is what I did and why I did it.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Kinnear.
Sir, with your permission, I'll read into the record aspects of Mr. Dowden's witness statement.
Yes, thank you.
We went to the second floor where the bridgehead was located. This area was very busy with firefighters wearing their BA, and I saw that there were 2 BA boards in use, which were being managed by firefighter O'Byrne and firefighter de Saint-Aubin. The bridgehead commanders were Watch Manager O'Keefe from Gulf 33 Kensington and Watch Manager Louisa de Silva from Gulf 34 Chelsea. They were in charge of managing the BA resources and the FSG calls, and they were deploying resources where necessary. I liaised with Louisa de Silva, and I remember tasking some BA wearers to the 13th floor where 5 people were trapped. At that point, BA crews were being deployed without firefighting media, which is a hose or an attachment known as a branch. The branch is the bit at the end of the hose that is used to turn water on and off. This goes outside policy, but we just didn't have the resources. The BA boards I mentioned are used to manage and monitor each individual firefighter that enters the fire. A system called telemetry is fitted to each BA body set, and they have a tally which goes into the BA board. This system then knows each firefighter that has been deployed, how much air is in their cylinder, the amount of time lapsed, and it sounds an alarm when their air is getting too low. The conditions faced by the individual wearing BA can dictate how long the cylinder lasts. This system allows us to know if any firefighters are in distress, and it electronically logs their progress. At the bridgehead, I continued to manage the BA wearers who were tasked to rescue the residents, as at that point, I later discovered that we'd had 170 FSG calls to deal with. I remember that one crew I sent to the flats could not bring the resident down because the stairwell had become compromised with smoke. Although this steps outside policy, we had to take breathing apparatus from firefighters and hand them to those that were rescuing the residents to provide them with respiratory protection. The smoke was so toxic at certain points of the stairwell and at different stages of the incident that if the residents had come into it without that protection, 2 mouthfuls of that air would cause them to become unconscious, which unfortunately did occur. At this point, there were the first reports of casualties coming out. I was on the bridgehead, and the first casualty that I saw was a black adult male who was in a very bad way. I advised Command Unit 8 of this casualty. I remember that there was a group of firefighters who were working on him near the mezzanine area, by the stairs that went down towards the ground floor. I didn't see the specifics of what they were doing, as there were 3 or 4 firefighters around him. I requested that the LAS attend, was advised that they wouldn't be able to as there was a triage area outside to the east of the block near Kensington Leisure Centre. I helped the firefighters, who included firefighter Dorgu, take the male to the LAS triage centre. Nevertheless, we carried him to the LAS triage centre on the east side. This felt like it was a long way from the tower and needed to be much closer. By the time I got back to the bridgehead, there were a number of casualties coming down. I particularly remember 2 young girls aged around 4 or 5 years old and 7 or 8 years old who appeared to be sisters and were being carried out wearing BA sets. I'm assuming that they were also taken to the LAS triage point. At that point, I knew things were going to be really, really bad. Group manager Richard Welsh made the decision to move the bridgehead up to the 3rd floor in order to chase the fire. The maximum we could go up was 1 floor below the fire. We therefore had to move the equipment and boards to the 3rd floor, and Richard Welsh took over managing the bridgehead. He was assisted by group manager Pat Goulbourne, and the BA wearers were constantly being committed to the fire floor. We discovered that the south exit was also compromised with falling debris. As a result, we took him towards the west side where an entry and exit point had been made and some PVC blanking plates by firefighters using forced entry equipment. This new entry and exit point was approximately 30 to 40 metres away from an LAS triage centre, which is on the west side of the tower. Whilst I was outside, I could see people at the windows on around the 8th and 9th floors and told a firefighter to communicate reassurances to them via his loud hailer, and I then went back into the tower. At the bridgehead, I asked Pat Goulbourne and Richard Welsh to designate an officer or firefighter to walk around the perimeter and locate residents that were at their windows. I could see people banging on windows for help. When I returned to the BA entry control point on the 3rd floor, I saw firefighter O'Byrne and firefighter de Saint-Aubin still on the entry control board, and they looked exhausted. They were having to manage so much information with the multiple FSG calls that were occurring, and they had been there from the beginning. I remember having a heated discussion with GM Pat Goulbourne about relieving them. It was still quite busy in that area. There was also no water for the BA crews or firefighters that needed rehydration, and I requested that GM Matt Cook from the operations review team obtain water that could be used to both hydrate crews and be used for radial cooling, meaning that the firefighters could place their wrist pulse points in the water, therefore cooling themselves down. At some stage, I went back to the ground floor lobby area where, together with WM Glyn Williams and SM Pete Wolfenden, we utilised a grid on the wall showing which rooms we had rescued residents from and the number of residents that had been rescued. It was around this time that the first firefighter emergency was declared. This happens when a firefighter has not returned to the entry control point after being committed, and the entry control board or BA set whistle has activated, showing that there is no air in their BA set or that there has been no movement from a firefighter for a period of time. The firefighter was identified as being firefighter Hill, but I don't know him or his station. GM Richard Welsh tasked me to look for him, and I went round the BA staging area in the lobby and the incident ground, asking if anyone knew him or had seen him. I could not find firefighter Hill, and I returned to the lobby area. I later learnt that he had been found. CM Nathan Ash reported that the fire was spreading downwards towards the bridgehead on the 3rd floor. I informed GM Richard Welsh, and the bridgehead was moved to the ground floor lobby. Because the decision was taken to move the bridgehead, a tactical withdrawal was initiated. GM Richard Welsh and I used our whistles to alert crews of the withdrawal. In this instance, I don't think the upper floors could hear the whistles as they were very busy, and I don't remember a roll call taking place. There was now smoke in the ground floor lobby area, and the decision was made to minimise the amount of personnel within the building. Due to the nature of this fire, there was a concern about the structure of the building. I wouldn't describe the smoke as heavy, but there was enough to cause discomfort. We started to evacuate those firefighters that were not wearing BA, but the west side had now become compromised with falling debris. I suggested to some firefighters that they utilise some folding tables as shields for protection when they entered and exited the building, and later the TSG police officers gave us their riot shields and officers to facilitate firefighters entering and exiting the building. I found myself near the LAS triage area on the west side of the building. This was very busy with firefighters and BA wearers as they'd congregated there rather than in the building due to the safety issues. Debris that was alight continued to fall and collect around the base of the tower. I saw some firefighters under a slide in the playground with a covering jet to extinguish the debris at ground floor level. I would describe the debris as being large sheets of metal and molten plastic. There were also smaller pieces falling. The falling debris was so bad that the crew from Paddington had to withdraw the aerial appliance. I was tasked to muster the EDBA wearers to the west side of the tower and to liaise with WM Matt Gregory, who was managing their commitment into the tower. At this point, the incident had been made pumps 40, and there were more resources available. I walked around looking for FRU crews, and I told any EDBA wearers to go to the west side of the tower. As I walked around, I saw that all 4 sides of the building were alight. I did not know what time it was. It was dark, but looked like it was getting lighter. When I got back round the tower, I grabbed a cup of tea from the Salvation Army that were now near the community centre. I had a brief moment to gather my thoughts and return to the tower via the forced entrance on the west side. I saw a firefighter with a burn on the back of his neck and assisted him with putting water on it, and I saw crew manager Ben Gallagher from Paddington, who was struggling, and I helped him to take some of his kit off, gave him water, and fanned him to cool him down. At this point, another casualty came out, and I assisted with her. She was a young black adult female who was brought out with a towel or jumper over her head, and she was very agitated, whilst the LAS, she was telling them not to touch her. I again returned to the ground floor lobby area of the tower. GM Pat Goldborn was about to go up the stairwell to 2 branches, which he was going to take to the 5th floor of the block. I suggested that I take them, as he was in charge of the bridgehead. I took them from him and went into the stairwell without any BA. I did not think about that, and just got on with it, as it would have taken too long to fetch my BA, and I felt that this job needed immediate attention. I hadn't been tasked at that point to be part of any BA crew. There was heavy smoke from the 4th floor upwards, especially around the 5th floor. On speaking to the BA crew there, whose names I do not know, I was told that the branches were not required, and I made my way up to the 6th floor in case they were needed there, where I noticed that the smoke was heavier. I didn't see any BA crew there and went to return back downstairs, whereupon I bumped into a family of 3 trying to get out of the tower. I'm not sure which level this was on. I returned upstairs and assisted another black adult male who was clearly in distress and had been subjected to smoke inhalation. I poured water over him in an effort to cool him down, for which he was extremely thankful. I would describe him as being bald, thick-set and wearing a suit jacket and jumper. I can't remember how he got out of the building. I've been asked whether I can describe the smell within the tower, but I can't recollect anything that stands out. I think because there was so much going on. Around 5:36 a.m, I went outside to get water, and I helped WM Matt Gregory to get firefighters in and out of the exits with the help of the police riot shields. The building was completely alight inside and out apart from the lower floors that we were working from. Heavy black smoke was rising from the building. At around 7:30 a.m, I saw the rest of my crew for the first time. There were real water supply issues because of the amount of people being committed into the fire floors. This was causing a lot of pressure, and some of the hose had burst due to the debris that had fallen on the south side. GM Richard Welsh told us to change the delivery hose from Gulf 271 to the dry riser on the south side of the tower. You couldn't see the hose due to the amount of debris on it, and debris was still falling from above. Firefighter Dave Badillo and I, whilst using a riot shield as protection from the falling debris, went to the dry riser and tried to trace the perished hose. However, we had 2 lengths of hose going from the dry riser, but only one of them had failed, so we tried to trace that back, and I was very conscious of protecting ourselves from the falling debris at the same time. Dave found the damaged hose, so we turned the water supply off, which had to be done quickly. We plugged in the new length of delivery hose to the dry riser, all the while with debris falling around us. We then recharged the delivery hose into the dry riser outlet, and it started working again. We'd been fighting the fire for about 7 hours now, and everyone in my crew was exhausted and looking completely shell-shocked. Thankfully, none of my crew had been injured. We went to the Salvation Army and got cups of tea. At around 08:30 a.m, we were found by WM Sean Coltrus, who directed us to go to CU8 in order to get the instruction that we could be stood down. Appliances Golf 271 and Golf 272 were to remain in position as they were still being used. I requested over the radio that everyone meet at Golf 271, and we walked to CU8 in Treadgold Street. Once there, GM Charlie Pugsley, a fire investigator, and Commissioner Danny Cotton told us to wait for a while, so we sat and took the opportunity to make calls to our family. Shortly afterwards, we were given a small debrief by the Commissioner and were taken to North Kensington Fire Station by an LFB people carrier at around 9 a.m. Then my watch battery ran out, so I can't be precise with timings. Once there, we showered, stored what equipment we had, and started making notes of the incident. Contemporaneous notes are completed by individuals where there was a fatal fire, and in the case of incidents such as Grenfell, as this was a major incident. The notes were a way of capturing what had happened whilst the events were still fresh in our minds. A GM came and spoke to us, but I can't remember his name. I remember SM Wayne Johnson and Borough Commander Spencer Sutcliffe calling me into the station office, but I can't remember what was said, apart from the fact that it went along the lines of a welfare chat. We were due back in for night shift at 8 p.m. and were instructed to come in and just finish our notes and then go home. That night duty, we completed our notes, and this was facilitated by WM Chris Rose and WM Mick Boyle, who are part of the fire investigation team. Firefighter Batterby had his tunic taken from him as it was burnt by debris and had to be examined. Since the events of that night at Grenfell Tower, the LFB has facilitated counselling and rehabilitation group sessions. I found it very difficult to deal with the events of Grenfell Tower. I've never dealt with anything as unprecedented or on the same scale of Grenfell Tower since joining the fire service. Mentally, things have got easier, but I will never forget June the 14th, 2017. I'm not aware of any other way we could have dealt with this situation. We all did what we could, and we acted as fast as possible. There were 40-plus machines on scene, and everyone was exhausted and doing their best. I still don't know how the fire travelled as it did, and in that manner and rate. So that concludes what is to be read from Mr. Dowden's witness statement.
Yes, thank you.
The final matter before we rise today is just a brief update on housekeeping
Yes.
matters, sir. A timetable has been circulated, hopefully by now, for the balance of the week. Tomorrow we will start at 9:30, with your permission, sir, with Mr. Batterby giving evidence in the morning. In the afternoon, he'll be followed by Daniel Brown. On Friday, the 29th of June, we will be hearing evidence from Mr. Badillo.
Right.
So that concludes our business for today.
Good. Thank you very much. In that case, we'll break now and resume at 9:30 tomorrow, please. Thank you.